From the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina, this is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, presented by A Cloud Guru, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Last podcast of 2017, Brian. How you doing?
I'm good. It's been a good year. You know, made it through the holidays, made it through Christmas, and it actually snowed for like 2 minutes here in Raleigh this morning. So I think we got our winter weather out of the way. It's good.
Yeah,
good.
That's right. And you know what? It wasn't enough that there wasn't the usual run on bread and milk and all that stuff at the grocery store. So we're good.
Yeah. So we're all good. And now we're in that week where like nobody's really working. Nobody really knows what day it is. No one knows what time it is. It's just kind of like it's like a floater week. So it's good to do. What are we gonna do? Like a 2.5-3 hour podcast this morning? Yes,
that's right. Yeah, just to keep everyone entertained because they have nothing else to do this week.
That's right.
I'm going to be watching a lot of college football. How about you?
I am too. So here's my idea. So you know how we generally have a whole bunch of like nice people, like the folks at O'Reilly and some of the other events. Linux Foundation like will give us free passes to their events because they're like, oh, you guys are sort of like media and stuff. So I think if we talk about college football for maybe like 2 or 3 minutes here, maybe we can figure out a way to get media passes to like the college football playoff games.
All right, I'm in.
All right, so because it's your team,
that's all it takes.
It's your team, like they might get to Atlanta. It's pretty close. Like we got to figure out a way to finagle ourselves into that game.
Yeah, well, and here's the biggest thing I want to know. College football talk for a second. So, some know, some don't. I'm Clemson alumni, and of course, Clemson fan, and Clemson playing in the Sugar Bowl, and they pull the late game, and the West Coast pulls the early game. What the hell?
Yeah, I don't know what that's
I'm going to be up to like 2 a.m.
I know. I mean, the only good news is like you don't have to do anything next day, so you won't be functional. You wouldn't be functional anyways. But
yeah, true.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than a game that ends at 2 a.m. So, but yeah, I don't understand why they're doing that thing. It's got to be like a New Orleans thing. There's got to be like a law like games can't be played in New Orleans too early in the day because people aren't sober enough or something like that.
Right, exactly. All right, so hopefully that was enough talk, and maybe we can get some media passes now.
That's right, exactly.
Where are we at with Krispy Kreme donations for North Carolina Children's Hospital?
We're still right around $1,500, so we're about I think we set a goal of around $3,000 this year. Sometimes we bump it up if things are up a little bit, but the donations have been really nice so far, folks. If you want to make a donation, again, really simple, upper right corner of the Cloudcast.net website or cloudrise.com/thecloudcastnet. So all donations are always welcome, and we're now into the reality of we may have to break out our running shoes a little bit before that. Or are you going to go are you going to go completely cold turkey again this year?
So I don't know. I was running for a little while and then I stopped, and I need to start back, and I don't know. So I haven't made that determination yet. I will admit last year running it completely cold wasn't too bad.
Yeah,
it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be. I couldn't walk for probably another day or two, after the race, but I thought it was going to be a lot worse.
Yeah. and for anybody who's like, what in the hell are those guys talking about? We if you go out to the Cloudcast.net website, which most of you probably don't ever go to, because you listen to the stuff on the podcast and you listen to it through iTunes or Stitcher or whatever. We did write a history of what we do with the donut run, sort of long form thing. So if you're interested, you want to read, go back and take a look at that. It's got some videos of us doing it and explains the stupidity and explains like Aaron's crazy habit of going and having a gigantic milkshake after doing the runs and all that kind of stuff.
3,000 calories before lunchtime, just so everyone knows. 2,400 in donuts and another 600 in the cookout milkshake afterwards.
Yeah. So.
And then I go home and pass out for the rest of the day.
Exactly.
Which is true. I really do that. So also, if we get this out in time, because again, I really am in that state of limbo. I don't know what the date is and how many days we have left. If you get the donation in by the end of the year, of course, tax deductible here in the United States.
That's right. So we don't know what next year's taxes are going to look like. So get it in before you no longer can do donation or you no longer can take deduction. So get that in.
There you go.
Listen, man, before we jump into sort of our year-end predictions and sort of wrap up and everything, did you have any kind of favorite Cloudcast-related moments this year? I know a couple of years, like years ago, like somebody ran into you in like Cabo San Lucas or somewhere like on a beach, and they had a Cloudcast T-shirt or something. Or
and ironically enough, I'm wearing that exact same T-shirt right now. So I will say that, yeah. So I ran into somebody in Cancun. I was wearing one of the Cloudcast T-shirts, and they were like, "Oh my gosh, you know the Cloudcast." I'm like, "Well, yeah, kind of." So it's been interesting. I hadn't been to as many events this year, but for me, still is there's been multiple customer meetings, or I'll be working in the booth or doing at trade shows, and I'll just be kind of talking to somebody, and you could kind of see somebody like it's like the gopher thing. Their head pops up, and they kind of look around, and I'm like, oh no, and it'll usually end up being somebody from the show who doesn't recognize me, especially since I've had the beard for a while now. But someday I need to get around to social media and update it everywhere, because I still think a lot of them are like, my headshot from Citrix, which is, I don't know, 2-3 jobs ago at this point. So no one knows what I look like anymore, but they tend to recognize the voice, which is scary.
Yeah, the voice thing was interesting. I think we were at Serverless Conf in Austin, and we were standing in a big crowd, and you and I were just talking just to ourselves, and somebody literally turned around and they were like, "Oh my gosh, it's you guys. I'm used to having you in my ears, in my head, and now you're standing right behind me live." And that was kind of a cool moment.
Yeah. Now, but I will say this related to the serverless conference. I would actually say, from an events standpoint, I actually think the serverless conference was a favorite moment for me this year. And it's sort of related to the podcast in that, we were there and we had the serverless cast there, but for me, meeting that community and that community, just being really just a bunch of doers and really doing some really amazing differentiated stuff. For me, one of the favorite moments of this year was just really getting involved in there and kind of watching it from afar, while I'm not maybe an active participant in the serverless community per se, just watching all of that and the differences they're making is really amazing and a really fun part of everything. Yep.
Agreed. And all the stuff that goes on with the voice first stuff and what's going on with Alexa and all those other things are interesting offshoots and all. So definitely a community to keep an eye on going forward. So listen, real quick before we get into it, one last piece of housekeeping. Want to thank all of our sponsors for the year. Everybody who has sponsored the show or really kind of helped us make it happen and so forth. Obviously, a big thank you to A Cloud Guru, who's been kind of our primary sponsor for really the second half of the year. But also a big thank you to both Datadog and Media Temple, who sponsored shows earlier in the year and really just been good people. And whether it's sponsoring the show or folks like O'Reilly or the Linux Foundation, who helps us get into events and sometimes bring the show on the road and everything. Big thank you to all of them. So thank you to everybody who's been kind of a partner of the Cloudcast this year.
Yeah, it's been amazing for us. In the beginning, we were surprised anyone ever wanted to even listen to us, and then we were surprised anyone wanted to talk to us and be on the show, and then we were surprised when people actually wanted to help out with the show. And so it's been an amazingly fun ride helping with the community over the years. And so a huge thank you to our sponsors. Yep.
So this is always the show where we do kind of a quick rundown of where the show is, sort of a state of the show real quick. And I end up, this is like the one show of the year that I'm kind of a numbers nerd on. And, we try and track what's going on. It gives us a sense of if we're doing any good or, if people like things or trends and so forth. So thought I'd throw out a couple of numbers for people. So this is going to end up being our 52nd show of the year. I think that's the most we've ever done in 1 year. Last year, I think we did 50. So we actually did 52, basically literally one show a week. I think we took a few off and somehow we doubled up a couple, but 52 shows. So that's it's a new record for us. We had over a million listens this year. So thank you to everybody who listens and tells a friend and rates it on iTunes. And it's our first year ever hitting over 1 million listens in a year. So that's a really nice milestone.
And it's been interesting too. So again, we love tracking stats the best that we can. Yeah. And it's so funny. It's over 1 million listens in the sources we can track. Right. It is amazing to me how many sources and syndication and things get out there and how much is trackable and how much, quite frankly, isn't trackable as well. So, 1 million listens that we can track, which is just An amazing figure, and again, thank you to everyone for that.
Right. We have learned a lot that podcast analytics are generally horrible, which is kind of amazing given how much people listen to podcasts and how much people are getting their news and their politics and their sports and everything from those things. But definitely an area that could improve. The other stat that was sort of interesting, or again, kind of goes along with the listens, is we found out that iTunes tracks sort of their top 100, top 200. We were in the top 100 in tech for a lot of the year. And what's interesting is, I mean, there is a lot. It's sort of anything that has to do with tech, everything from like fixing your Tesla to listening to TED Talks to keynotes from Apple shows and so forth. So to be included in that group was pretty cool. It was a really nice honor. And again, all these things always go back to just the audience and the community being awesome and telling people and listening regularly and all that stuff. So that part is very cool. Couple other things that we always track, and this is just us sort of figuring out where our guests have been. We always track how much our guests have gotten in terms of funding, whether it's VC funding or M&A funding, and we hit another milestone this year. Our guests took in they reached $8 billion in both money that have come in through M&A for them or being acquired and so forth. So every year it sort of stacks up a little bit. But we actually we reached another milestone. Or they reached another milestone of $8 billion, which is pretty cool. I think last year we were just shy of $7 billion or just around $7 billion. So
yep.
Decent year. We had four of our guests this year were acquired. So Deus was acquired by Microsoft. Black Duck was acquired by a private equity firm called Synopsys. Skipbox, the folks were little company, startup company, sort of our first serverless company that got acquired. Were acquired by the good folks at Bitnami, and then Iron.io wasn't directly acquired by Oracle, but sort of indirectly ended up at Oracle, going through private equity again. So four companies changed hands, and definitely a change in the landscape of M&A and VC funding. But we'll get into that part later.
Yeah. I was just going to say it'll be interesting to see how those numbers compare next year, because VC funding and M&A in general is definitely a topic that we're going to be talking about here.
Yeah.
And the other one I wanted to bring up too, lastly, was because I just think. And it's also something we're going to be talking about, just voice and voice skills in general. But we have an Alexa skill. And it was, again, combination of efforts through A Cloud Guru. They were extremely helpful, and they really helped us bring an Alexa skill to market. And so there is, if you go out and search on, and there's a link in the show notes as well. But there is the Cloudcast through Alexa as well. So yet another avenue. Oops, no, wait, hold on. I got to shut off Alexa. There we go. I muted her before she piped up. Sorry about that. I forgot to mute my Alexa before we started recording. I always forget. But that was a fantastic little bit of technology and something we're super, super proud of. And huge thanks to the Cloud Guru folks for that.
Yep. So yeah, we're everywhere. We are. We've always joked around we want to be everywhere. We're now everywhere. So very cool. Well, where do you want to start, man? Let's. You want to dive into? Oh, one last thing. For anybody who's like, hey, you guys are going to make predictions, big deal. Like, who do you think you are making predictions? We've actually done this for about 4, 5, 6 years maybe now. So if you ever are curious about how bad our predictions are, we'll put the link in the show notes to the last 5 or so years of predictions we've made. I think we've done a reasonably good job of predictions. Obviously, we get some wrong, but if you want to go back and listen to those shows, they're in the show notes as well.
We're probably around Lee Corso level.
Yeah, there you go.
Comes to predicting.
There you go. Well, where do you want to get started?
Which isn't saying much for them.
No. Although we need some Cloudcast headgear. That's what we need.
Yeah, exactly. Why don't we start with the mergers and acquisitions? You have some tech stock prices as well, but I kind of wanted to dig into the mergers and acquisitions just solely because we already started talking about it a little bit. Yeah. For me, I will say this, kind of a trend in general for the year, and it's something we definitely felt, although there was 1 or 2 articles actually published about it towards the end of the year, but I feel like we felt it in the market earlier in the year. The VC funding just kind of dried up.
Right.
And I didn't know if it went to other areas because, we tend to be emerging tech and infrastructure and cloud kind of things. And we were just kind of wondering, hey, did all that VC funding, did that just shift elsewhere on the market? Did that go to like machine learning and AI, or did it go to elsewhere? But it turns out it's probably just down overall.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on all of that?
Yeah, there was a couple of things, and there were some nice things we'll put in the show notes that people who track VC funding, over the last X number of years have put. So some good reports out there to take a look at. I think we saw a couple things. I think we saw it was hard, and we heard this from a number of startups that we talked to. Like, it was hard to get a B round. So if you weren't showing a path to fund, path to revenue by the end of your A round, or you hadn't gotten the product to where it had some level of adoption by the end of your A round, which is tricky, especially since folks were only taking, say, like $10-15 million A rounds and so forth, and had to hire people. They were having a real hard time getting B rounds, and we heard that throughout the year. We heard that early in the year. The other thing I think we saw was, essentially like in our space, I think people were more hesitant to give the real big money to some of these open source projects, right? I think, sort of Docker may end up being one of the last companies that got the really, really big round of funding, for an open source project, just because the pace of people jumping into open source and, not having a differentiation in that space and so forth made it harder. So, we definitely saw it. And I think if you start to look in through those numbers, the numbers are starting to back up that, at least for our space, we're not seeing nearly as much VC funding.
Yeah, completely agree. And for me, it's just a kind of an evolution. Now, I will say this. There is an article, and it's called VC Funding is Down in the show notes. Go read that one in particular. There's a lot of really interesting trends there. And again, it's things we've talked about here of like, things maybe are just going, to SaaS offerings. Well, it turns out SaaS offerings are down as well. And the numbers that they put in there, if I remember correctly, it's a TechCrunch article.
Yep.
But super fascinating read, and I think it backs up a lot of the gut feelings we've had, and that kind of goes into the trends a little bit in the tech stock prices. So, you want to talk about those a little bit? Yeah,
I list them. I will try and get these in the show notes. I just went through and sort of said, okay, what did the market do? What did the market tell us about a bunch of tech stocks? And I think I listed about 25 of them. And I started off by just saying, okay, what did the market do in general? Because obviously the market was up this year. The Dow Jones was up, and the NASDAQ were both up. They were both up roughly 25%. So, good for everybody's portfolio or 401k or whatever. But then I tried to sort of compare that to, as a baseline for other tech stocks. And, I think in general, we saw some distinct winners. There was a couple that really sort of jumped out at me. A couple of, companies on the Asian front. Alibaba was up 98%. Who else was real big from that perspective? Tencent was up 121%. So definitely saw some of the Asian.
Hortonworks 150.
Yeah, Hortonworks and Cloudera I included just from an open source perspective. I included Red Hat as well. And the open source ones were all over the place, right? So Hortonworks was up like 150%. Red Hat was up like 70%. But then Cloudera was, I think, down a couple of percentage points. So, there wasn't necessarily a specific kind of, you could go like, all the open sources were up or down. I think we saw some of the legacy companies, what are sort of now referred to as the old guard. So, I mean, Cisco was up, but they were basically up 26%. So they were with the market. IBM was down. HP was down. So you could see some of that. And then you saw the cloud providers were up above the benchmark. So, Amazon was up 50%, Google was up 30, high 30s, Microsoft was up high 30s. So, the trends we talk about all the time are starting to play out, very much in the market as well, in terms of, what the market is voting on their stock price as well.
Yeah, completely agree. It is moving to the, again, the big companies of the next generation of tech are probably the public cloud or public cloud related companies, and the ones that are hurting right now are the infrastructure companies. I mean, you could say that as a quick summary, and then I would say the open source ones is the outlier of, some are up, some are down, and the market is probably still figuring all of that out.
Right. And then of course Bitcoin was up 17,000%. So there's your outside. Right. There's your outlier.
So what are some other trends for 2017 that we've been kind of seeing in general?
I think, from an M&A perspective, I think we're seeing, if we go outside of the industry, what was sort of interesting, I mean, so we're seeing really big, we saw some really big industry mergers. And I think, so whether it was like Aetna and CVS for almost $70 billion, or you saw, Disney bought Time 21st Century Fox, or you saw AT&T buying Time Warner. I think we're seeing people making basically platform bets, right? We're no longer seeing companies kind of, build out their portfolio or sort of adjacencies. We're seeing them go, we're going to buy the whole platform. We're going to try and, consolidate the industry. So I think we're in that phase of those big M&A things. And then from a tech perspective, I don't know. We listed a whole bunch of things. We can jump in and start anywhere. I'll start with containers since that's sort of my space. I'll let you jump in with one. I think we're definitely seeing containers become more mainstream. There's nothing sort of unique in that. The one thing I will sort of caution people in that I live in this space and I get to see a lot of the behind the scenes numbers, maybe more than gets published, is be very wary of some of these like random surveys that come out. It's great that companies do the surveys, but when their sample size is like 300 or 400 people, or it's like, oh, we did a survey of people that came to, the event or something like that, how often are you using whatever. I don't feel like there's been any great surveys that show the breadth of kind of where containers are being used. And I think people are getting some bad data points, or they're reading some bad data points into. Hey,
sorry.
Hey, Alexa.
Alexa decided to pipe up again.
So I'll start with containers. I think they're being more widely adopted than the market's sort of reporting at this point.
Yeah, I agree with you completely, and it's been super interesting watching. People just kind of to continue along that line, the virtualization trend, and then is containers replacing virtualization? And I think everyone by now, we can finally, everyone is starting to get its additional tool in the tool chest, the same way probably serverless is, which is another thing we'll probably talk about. What I'm finding more and more is everyone is embracing the different tools in the tool chest philosophy, which is a good thing.
Yep.
But then the underlying infrastructures themselves are becoming less and less important. It's just how many tools are on top of those, platforms, as you were talking about them earlier. And so, I'll take one here, which is more just this trend towards HCI in general. Whether it's storage companies, networking companies, doesn't matter who it is. All of the big infrastructure companies are now becoming HCI companies, and one of my biggest initial thoughts on that, because I tend to live and breathe in this space these days, is this idea of, is it going to be just 100% software defined? Like, I'll kind of use some examples that are, neutral third parties, if you will. vSAN, right? vSAN is software defined storage on top of commodity hardware. It doesn't matter what kind of hardware it is.
Right.
And you get a different level of performance characteristics of something like that, and different levels of success because of that. And then so it's almost like the build your own versus the reference architectures of FlexPod and vSpecs and all that other things we had once upon a time. And then you have the converged infrastructure versions of full blown vBlocks and FlexPods. Already built. And you're starting to see that exact same thing in HCI. You're starting to see commodity hardware build your own. You're starting to see some kind of blueprints of these are certified if you use this kind of combination of kit. And then there is we own the supply chain aspect of it all. And so, everything old is new again. We're seeing the exact same thing as before, but we're just seeing it in a slightly different format. But you're seeing that still those three different build philosophies as the underlying concepts to HCI going forward. And it is super interesting to me to watch all of this play out all over again, just like it did, 10 years ago. Yeah. And so for me, it's interesting because everyone is like, oh, this is different. This is different. I'm like, well, it's kind of sort of different, but the underlying how you get there is exactly the same. Yeah.
I think the flip side to that, sort of like everything's old is new again, which we do see a lot of in tech. It's okay. We've seen this game plan before. We've seen this playbook played out this way before, and I do think there is sort of an interesting sort of flip side to that, which is, the traditional vendors have always been like, we're going to come out with a release every X number of months, right? So I always use the analogy of like, VMware used to come out once a year, and then OpenStack came out every 6 months, and now Kubernetes is like every 3 months. We run into that with OpenShift being every 3 months. It aligns with Kubernetes. And then you have this whole phenomenon of people trying to figure out like, well, when does Amazon come out with stuff? Or when do the public cloud providers come out with stuff? And, it's almost become a little bit of a running joke. I mean, we had Corey Quinn on who does the, Last Week in AWS newsletter and keeps up with this stuff. It's, the public cloud is a different beast, which on one hand, everyone, they love to talk about, hey, we released this many features and our velocity is this. And then you talk to a lot of people and they're like, I had no idea that came out, or how am I supposed to keep up with all these things? And so I think there's definitely a distinct gap. Not necessarily saying it's a good gap, but there's distinctly a gap between, what the traditional vendors who have to ship you something that either lives on-prem or is a piece of software or whatever, and how you are learning and keeping up with, what any of the public cloud providers are doing, and them just kind of rolling out features whenever they want to. They don't wait until their trade show. They don't wait until a 6-month window. It's just whenever. And can people really keep up with all that stuff? It's sort of like keeping up with the news.
Well, and I'll add another layer of complexity onto all of that as well. The other thing we're starting to see is the on-prem infrastructure more and more integrating with and talking to and becoming very seamless with the public clouds.
Yep.
So this idea of, HCI or secondary storage, all of these others, well, they almost always, to compete, have to have some level of public cloud offering or integration as well. And so now you almost have at times a couple times a year cycle, whether it's hardware or software, with an very dynamic, constantly iterating public cloud release model. And so now you not just have two models, but you have two models trying to work together.
Yeah. And I think, again, sort of the flip side of that is, we have this interesting dynamic in the industry where if you read a lot of the reports that come out, or you talk to a lot of CIOs, or a lot of companies who aren't startups, aren't greenfield, will say, hey, we want some sort of hybrid environment, right? We have to leave some things on-prem and we're going to run things in the public cloud, and they'll call it hybrid or multi-cloud. And it's, we're moving into 2018, and I would sort of argue that there really isn't a sort of a dominant hybrid cloud kind of architecture yet. And I don't know that there's necessarily the simplest hybrid cloud. I mean, there's still a lot of things going on, and you've got people like Azure trying to make a play of like Azure in the cloud and Azure Stack, and, people trying to do the, same thing on-prem as there is in the cloud, but it's still kind of always got some big monkey wrench in the middle of it. And I'm surprised we haven't advanced further than that, but it still feels like we have this mismatch between what the market would really like and what the market is delivering.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Well, and along those same lines, I know you have some thoughts here around it. This idea of public cloud, not just as an architecture, but as a portfolio play. And what is your, what we're seeing way back when was public cloud was more of a cost reduction, or we're going to get this kind of savings, or we're going to get that kind of savings. I don't feel like anyone really talks about that anymore.
No.
They tend to talk about it 100% as this is a portfolio, and this is a portfolio of services, and we're adding new services, like the idea of AWS cost reductions. We don't talk about that anymore.
No, never.
And so what's your thoughts on all of that?
I think that's I think you started to hit on it. It used to be, hey, here's cheap storage in the cloud, or here's cheap compute in the cloud, and every 3 months it's going to get cheaper, and I don't think we ever talk about that anymore. I mean, obviously there's lots of really good tools out there to help you manage it, but I think all of the cloud providers have basically said, look, the game we have to play is I have to have a really, really robust portfolio, right? Like I can't play the cheaper game anymore. I have to play the look how complete my portfolio is. And then they're all playing a little bit different game in terms of, do I do the Amazon route where I'm basically giving you a gigantic toolbox and you figure out how to integrate them, and maybe they're easy to integrate, maybe they're not. I think Azure is trying to do a more, sort of Microsoft-y way of, thinking about integrating them and giving you more kind of, A plus B equals C kind of things. But definitely, you look at that, and the trick to that is that's great. I mean, even the on-prem companies have tried to do this for a long time, right? Like that was the whole idea of the EMC Federation, like own all the technology. Oracle tries to do this. But it does make it tough. If you go and talk to a company, who's the person you talk to that is the buy everything person, right? You're not going to get a meeting with the CIO every single time. And so it does sort of make it weird when you walk in the room and you're like, okay, which silos do I have? Which groups do I have? How does that align to my portfolio? Does my sales force know how to sell that whole thing? Or they only, so I think we're going to run into some of the same challenges that the large, enterprise vendors have run into, is what the large clouds are going to run into, is that, just having a slide that shows all the technology you have doesn't mean it'll be easy to sell or exactly who to sell to.
Yeah, and it's again a little bit of everything old is new again thing of, okay, if you're going to do that acquisition model, so along the lines very, very early on in public cloud, you could kind of do the rogue spending, if you will, of put it on credit cards and run up a whole bunch of bills. And I don't know what happened there. My phone's freaking out. Sorry about that. And so, but anyway, what happens here though is you're running into this model, and we've talked about this before. How do you sell into the enterprise? How do you sell at scale into the enterprise? Well, a lot of times that is, hey, you got to go build an enterprise sales force. And that is something we have seen. We've seen Amazon this year building out an enterprise sales force. We've seen Azure building out an enterprise sales force. And we've even seen Google start to build out an enterprise sales force as well. Right. Although I would say, and that's actually going to go into some of my predictions, Google, I think, is in this area struggles. And it's something we've talked about before is, if they could just figure out how to crack the enterprise, but I don't know if it's in their DNA.
Yeah.
And that's just a harder, larger topic that we can talk about another time. But for me, this public cloud, the bigger it gets, the more traditional it has to get.
Yeah, I think so. And I think, it kind of goes back to everything old is new again. Everything new is old again in IT. It's, you'll go through these 5 and 7 year cycles and you'll be like, okay, it was hype. And now it's back to, okay, the old way of buying things or a known way of buying things, if you will. And maybe things like per second, per minute billing will take off. And obviously there'll be a group of people that love that, right? Typically it ends up being the startups, but it may end up being that, we've moved past the startups are the ones who love it. And now it's the experimenters in large enterprises, right? So the centers of excellence, the CTO's office, the, big data group that's trying to, quote unquote, do digital transformation. Maybe that per minute, per second billing is going to be the thing that unlocks their new creativity. But it's not something yet that is sort of a everybody understands thing yet. And that takes a while. Yeah,
completely. You want to, any other trends you want to talk about before we move on to 2018?
No, I think we hit on a lot of them. And if we did forget them, they're in the show notes so folks can go back and take a look at some of them. But those are some of the ones I think that kind of affect our space the most, that we hit on. Yeah. What about, I think, as we look at, we always try and project for the year. We always have these grand ambitions around this time of year, and we say, hey, we're gonna do sort of what they call a quote unquote editorial calendar. We're gonna map out the show for the next 6 to 9 months, and it's gonna help us get guests. And and then like every New Year's resolution, it sort of fizzles out. But what are some of the areas that, as we're thinking about what to cover for the year, what do you think we ought to be maybe focusing a little more on than we have in the past?
So one of the biggest ones that I want to actually explore is more the idea of where is the emerging tech going? And what I mean by that is, let's be really honest for a second. If you combine all of those trends and stories we talked about, VC funding is down, the amount of infrastructure startups is down, which therefore means us being an emerging tech podcast, our pool of guests is going down. And so, for me, where is the next really big set of interesting emerging tech? Is it serverless? Is it, some of the voice stuff? Is it AI and ML? I'll be completely honest with you. I don't know, but I'm really fascinated with just the concept of edge computing. right now in general. For me, no matter what we kind of call a lot of this stuff, it seems to be everything is going towards the edge of, that core infrastructure is maybe solved by either on-prem or public cloud. Well, that edge stuff, whether it's a whole bunch of devices all talking, and ingesting data, or whether it's a whole bunch of devices that need some kind of logic before, they kind of develop some trends and things like that. That's the big topic for me that I want to unpack, but I don't quite know where it will lead yet.
Right.
I completely admit that. Yeah. So that's for me the big one.
Yeah. Well, and the nice thing about edge computing is it brings us back an opportunity to blame the network for stuff. For why things aren't going well. So that's always a good trend in things. To me, there's a couple that are starting to jump off the page. One is, I'm wondering if there should be like a wanted poster up on billboards or signposts or whatever. Like, what happened to DevOps? I don't feel like the DevOps crowd is nearly as vocal as they used to be. I'm wondering if people are starting to sort of sour a little bit on DevOps, or if the DevOps crowd is now going, okay, it wasn't as easy as I thought. There wasn't sort of like a miracle drug to become DevOps. So now we're going to start calling ourselves SRE. And do we start seeing SRE days, and does SRE take over the old DevOps crowd? Or is it really truly something different because, they've sort of figured out sort of how to culturalize this, bringing together dev and ops and automating a lot of things and doing some. So that's an area that'll be sort of interesting to me. The other one is, you go back to your question of like, where's the innovation going to come from? We highlighted that people like Alibaba and Tencent did really, really well last year. Maybe it comes from sort of our non-Silicon Valley locations. Maybe we need to be, more in tune with what's going on in Asia, what's going on in China. It'll make it a little tricky for the show just because of time zones and so forth. But, I would love to get some guests from that region of the country region of the world and understand, what does your innovation curve look like? Where is innovation coming from? Is it coming from the universities? Do you have robust VC funding? How is that happening? So that's an area that I definitely think we should explore this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And for all of our listeners out there, if you have any ideas, especially when it comes to international guests or international topics, that's an area we're always looking to explore, but we completely admit that's, one of the things we maybe don't dig into as much when it comes to time constraints for the show. It's sometimes you just go to what's easy. Right? We completely admit that. And so when we're trying to expand ourselves out in 2018, that's something we want to do. I'll kind of take the next couple and combine them together in the show notes. I want to explore AI and ML a lot more. And by the way, go listen to Sam's show go back and listen to Sam Charrington, who had a guest on the show not too long ago, but go listen to his show. But I will say this, of all of the areas we've talked about, we've said, VC funding is going here or going there or not going here or not going there. I'm surprised at the lack of, I shouldn't say I'm surprised. It is maybe makes sense on some level that the lack of funding going into serverless right now. But the amount of VC funding going into AI and ML is just insane right now. When you look at the number of players in that market, I mean, it is pretty crazy. And it does feel like, will there be an AI and ML bubble for VC funding at some point, the way there was for infrastructure?
Yeah, and I feel like the AI and ML stuff is still, at least unless maybe you live and breathe in that community and you've been in that community for a really long time. Like, to me, it's hard to tell the difference between one new company and the next, and kind of what their messaging is, and why they're different. And I know we had like Bonsai was on the show, Bonsai AI, and they were somewhat unique in saying, hey, we're going after like industrial applications, right? So like factories and supply chain and stuff. And so that sort of makes sense. Okay, it's different than the AI for consumer or something. But I feel like there's a ton of money pouring in because the venture community doesn't want to miss out on it, because obviously it's huge. It's going to impact autonomous vehicles and drones and all these other, what could be big industries. But it still feels very hard to figure out where the trends are, like what's the leaderboard look like. And then it also feels like it's still way, way, way too complicated to really get value out of it. And maybe that's just you don't have enough data, so you don't have enough value, but something feels way too complicated still.
Yeah, agreed. And it's, we're in those early days of not just figuring out the use cases, but figuring out the products themselves and product market fit.
Right.
I'm going to kind of transition into another one that's related, but not related all at the same time. And that's the voice technologies in general. And I'll kind of ask you, I didn't ask you this ahead of time, but I'll ask you, like, how much do you still use your Alexa or Google Home or both? I have both sitting on my desk, and I know you have both sitting in your kitchen. So do you use them more? Do you use them less? And thoughts on the future of that? I've got some thoughts here, but I wanted yours first.
Aside from people listening to it for the podcast, I mean, we use it primarily from music devices. I think we found that there's still, I mean, there is a certain aspect of it that the voice recognition is amazing. I mean, you can have a lot of people in the room, and you can yell out to Alexa to turn the volume down or up, so I mean they've kind of cracked that part of the voice recognition. It's far better than like Siri. So some of the home assistants are better, but in terms of like the experience of it being a smart device to help answer questions for you, I feel like it's still stuck on. It has to exactly fit a certain format question. It doesn't do well with kind of abstract questions or, things along those lines. And so, it's okay. It's a great music device, but other than that, it hasn't, you're right. It hasn't grown in adoption.
And for me, so actually I just read an article this morning that said the Echo Dot was the most given Christmas gift on Amazon, which I thought was pretty amazing. So, there's people still doing it. There's still people trying it. And I will say this, I actually use ours a lot, but for me, it is 100% the home automation, home assistant kind of market of setting timers or remind me of this or add this to my shopping list or play music. But for me, I will say this, that probably the advantage and disadvantage, we've talked about this previously, of the Amazon ecosystem, the skills are both good and bad. The reason why I say that is because once you get a decent number of skills enabled, you can't remember how to invoke the damn things.
Right.
And
exactly.
It's like, oh gosh, what's the name of that skill? And you're trying to do it and you can't invoke it. Then you got to pull up your phone and look up the name of the skill anyway. And so unfortunately for me, I hit a wall when it came to actually going out, more than a couple different skills outside of the built-in Amazon Alexa ecosystem.
Right.
And so when, it was mainly the skills barrier of what was the name of those skills. And so for that became a problem. And Google kind of has the opposite of, they have more of a closed model of where you're not necessarily enabling skills or calling out skills by name, but then I can't remember how to invoke them on them because they don't have skills names. They're all kind of built in. And so neither of them, I wanted to do more with them, but it almost was like a limitation of the voice systems. And maybe it's just the amount of stuff I can store in my head and not look at a screen on. So that was more the, but do I still use it all the time? Yes. Do I use it for new things? No.
Yeah. And I think the takeaway from that is, they're obviously, it's getting cheaper. They're obviously learning more because more people are using them and they're getting into more households. I think the voice aspect of it, essentially if you listen to people that follow this space and, whether you follow like an A16Z podcast or something else, I think people are starting to come around to the idea that voice is becoming sort of one of the new mediums that you want to somehow make a part of what you do, because there is a human element that could become very interesting, and the AI in the back end can make that more interesting. But yeah, I completely agree with you. The user experience of it is hasn't caught up to the hype of it yet. Definitely, but definitely would be good for us to get back some folks who are living in this voice space and figure out like how has it advanced? What do we not know about that people are beginning to experiment with? So definitely an area for us to explore. Well, listen, we've been going for a long time. Why don't we get into we've kind of got out of the prediction business somewhat. I mean, I think we still make some predictions, but they're less kind of really specific and more kind of just general. You want to jump into some of the predictions we had written down and just kind of riff on them for a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and actually, I had another one that I wanted to kind of throw out there as well, in addition to all of these. But I'll just start at the top here, and a continued decline of the middleman in all of our industries. Yeah. And it's one of those we've seen this as a trend, but at some point too, does everything start to accelerate? The biggest thing we're seeing is a lot of these trends, they kind of creep up on you, and then all of a sudden, boom, they just accelerate. And is this the year that we see that acceleration? That's more where I would like to go with the thoughts of all of this. We're seeing less and less of anything in the middle. Doesn't matter what it is, call it anything in that middle. It is less and less steps to get from point A to point B. The technologies themselves, by their very nature, are just becoming extremely disruptive.
Right. Yeah, I think you have to say, we said, let's say 4, 5, 6 years ago, like you couldn't be a startup company if you were, say, like buying data center space, right? Like it was the VCs were going to give you less money and you had to go directly to one of the public clouds because it was like, don't own those assets. And I think the sort of corollary to that, or the follow-on to that, is becoming the successful sort of startup companies can't have a middleman. Like you can't even begin to think about your business model having a middleman in it. And, we hear this all day long for anybody who listens to podcasts of, whether it's like food delivery or, the new ways that you shop for clothes, they're going to just send the clothes directly to you or whatever it is. But we're seeing this in everything. I've always seen it like with Uber and Lyft. You no longer, have a middle, you don't have a taxi dispatcher. Uber, you don't have to, go through sort of like a buying service to find a hotel room. But I think we're going to see this in a lot of different things. I mean, obviously we've seen it with IT, with the public cloud, but I think it's going to be very hard if you're a middleman you're going to have to figure out a very, very unique value proposition to continue to be very relevant.
Yep. Agreed. And kind of moving on, and this one is along the accelerating trends as well. So the concept of as public cloud becomes more mainstream and continues to increase in adoption, what do we do with those costs? Those costs also have to become mainstream. And who manages them and how do they manage them? Not just, like our good friends over at Cloudability, a third-party service or any of those, but how does Fortune 100 companies start to manage their cloud spend? And this to me goes to, and we've talked about it before, this idea of, some of the jobs at the turn of the century weren't around the previous century kind of thing. And this to me is a new growth area, not just in costs, but have entire teams in enterprises or other customers that are cost related or systems architecture related, but are 100% dedicated to public cloud and public cloud aspects. Yeah. This is going to be, is this going to be a new area for job growth? Quite frankly,
I think it is. I think there's definitely. I think we're definitely going to have to reach a point where. Look, we've had people who understood for a long time, like, the cost of a port was this, or the cost of a gigabyte was this, or, that was sort of their job. And, that had become kind of fixed in the industry. There were people who just knew how much certain technology cost, but you never heard them talk about that in the context of, what it meant to the business, right? Like, okay, we just bought $10 million worth of kit. Well, what is that going to do to impact the business? Yeah, you could tell you how much faster response time is. I think we're going to start to see people who are fluent enough in kind of how the cost structures work for, say, public cloud and so forth, that when they sit down with a line of business person and they go, hey, we're going through our sort of innovation roadmap. We're going through our new ideas roadmap. We're listening to the sales force tell us what they want. They'll be able to say, very clearly, like, okay, that experiment, that to roll out that kind of program is going to cost exactly this much. And, this is where the growth blips are going to be. So if we get above 50,000 users, there's going to be this step up, or there's going to be, I think we're going to see that start to happen really quickly, because that whole idea of, I want to roll out something new, and it may not be sort of a long-term permanent asset. It's going to be, a new program for some event that we're doing. I think people are going to get really smart about that. And not to say that you won't need the tools like the cloud abilities, or you won't need, somebody really smart like what Rodrigo Flores is doing at Accenture and other things. But I think you're going to have people that are fluent in that. Just like, if I asked you, hey, if you want to take a family of 4 down to Disneyland for a week, like what does that cost? Like people just know what that costs because it's a regular, everyday type of thing that people are talking about. Agreed.
You want to move on to the next one?
Yeah, I'm gonna throw this last one out there, and we'll see how far this one sort of goes. But we don't cover security a lot on the show. We do sometimes, and we always sort of immediately say, hey, we're not security gurus. So if you come on the show, I hope you're a guru because and I hope you are okay that we ask dumb questions because I think the security world is a unique sort of place. But given all the breaches we've seen the the Equifax breach, we see. I think we've become a little bit numb to the fact that like your social security numbers are floating out there. People are, okay with putting things out on the internet. And it sort of begs the question, like, does security really matter anymore? I say that sort of, hypothetically or, kind of rhetorically, but I almost wonder, what do we have to see for people to kind of get back into being, at a mainstream level, not just the CISO people, worried about security? Do we have to have, autonomous cars driving off into the Grand Canyon? Do we have to have like, a power outage that we know was driven because, somebody, hacked into the data grid or the power grid? I mean, like what's going to make us come back to caring that like our data is floating around all over the place and it's constantly getting hacked and the breaches are bigger and bigger?
Yeah, and my thoughts on this is actually, I think the model that has existed to date is not the model that can be used going forward, and that's why you're seeing a certain amount of fatigue in the market is just the model doesn't fit and there's no way to fix it in the current model. And so, I'll take, again, this may be a United States centric example, but, if we assume all of our social security numbers are kind of floating around on the internet somewhere, that then means the big 3 credit reporting agencies have a limited number of use unless you do the credit freeze, which basically means you have to call them to, it's instead of default open, it's default closed of the only way to get credit is for you to unfreeze your credit. So I think what we start to see is actually new process start to supplement everything where it embraces something like that to fix it. And so for me, I agree. There's probably even bigger events that need to happen, but then those bigger events then force a change in the policies, and those change in policies become the new normal.
Yeah. It's almost like, this is a terrible analogy, but it's almost like you need to have, a 9/11 scale kind of awareness event in order to make something happen. And, do we want the TSA of security to happen? Maybe not, right? I mean, people obviously want their money protected, their privacy protected, but how far will people are willing to go to sort of, build that new system that you're talking about? And then who should sort of be in charge of it? Should it be a regulated thing? Should it not be a regulated thing? I have no idea what the answers are. I would love to get some opinions from people on what that is, aside from the opinions of like, hey, let's all build a bomb shelter and, get some canned beans, but, some good intelligent opinions on that we'd love to have on the show.
Yeah. Yep. And I'm going to throw one last prediction out there because I think that was the last of our predictions.
Okay. You predicting Clemson?
That's right. And it's more of like it's a combination of prediction and a little bit of begging. So it's just about Google in general and Google Cloud Platform more specifically. I think this is their make or break year. And what I mean by that is, we've all kind of said and predicted the rise of certain big public clouds. That's come, and then way back when it was the $1 billion investments, right? IBM and all these others. It was $1 billion investment to get involved in the market. And then Simon Wardley and others were like, nope, it's not even $1 billion. And then everyone found out, nope, it wasn't. And so you really had the rise of what we would call the big 3, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. But I think everyone talks about them, but Google Cloud is always kind of that dangling third.
Yep.
And the reason why is because Google, for all of their products over the years, they don't always necessarily say they're in or they're out. They always kind of dabble. And I think this is the year where they have to go, okay, if we're serious about the enterprise and if we're serious about being a true public cloud and this being a recognizable revenue stream for the company, this is the year. Because AWS and Azure are turning up the heat and starting to really do the investments. And like we were saying earlier, it's a platform. And the longer time goes by that they don't really go all in on something like that, the gap widens. Yeah,
I have a little. So I agree with you. I whether it's make or break this year, it's hard to say. They have a lot of money, so you can stay in the game for a long time. I think a different way of phrasing what you just said, and we've given this feedback to Google for a long time, and we've always sort of joked that like Google has a hard time talking to people because it's not in their DNA. They talk to data, they don't talk to people. I think the way to think about it is if you were Google and you got into the game, say 5 or 6 years ago, when it was really just super early adoption, it was we hadn't crossed the chasm yet. Your technology and the coolness of your technology would have appealed to startups, and you could have sold startups on the idea that like you have the coolest technology, it's going to help them be bleeding edge because you're bleeding edge, and you could talk about sort of simplified pricing and so forth and all the cool things that Google does. Now we've crossed the chasm, right? We're into the mainstream people that use the public cloud. What that means is you're now dealing with people who have a history of dealing with IT in a certain way, right? It goes back to this theme we've had the whole show, which is like everything old is new again, everything new becomes old again. And which means, the key to your success isn't necessarily going to be the coolest technology. It's going to be, can you sell to the enterprise, right? And can you talk to the enterprise? And can you, endure long sales cycles, which the enterprise has? Can you deal with long RFPs, which the enterprise has, which sometimes seem asinine, but they are what they are? And to me, that's the bigger challenge from Google's DNA of not liking to talk to people and just wanting to make everything data. I'm going to be very much watching to see if Google hires people that have some of that experience. I haven't seen it. I know they've hired a lot of really smart people, but not necessarily people who, have a bunch of battle scars of having been enterprise and are willing to put that face on Google. So, again, we try not to be negative on Google because the technology is very cool and they power a lot of really powerful things and they're doing cool stuff with the community like Kubernetes. But I think that's another way of looking at why isn't Google higher up in the big three than they are.
Yeah, agreed. And don't get me wrong, I'm rooting for them because I love the tech and I think they have great offerings, but I just don't think enough people have embraced it yet for all kinds of various reasons. But yes, absolutely, that's a great point.
Yeah. Well, listen, man, we have gone for a long time. We are sneaking up on an hour. People have probably long.
Are we really?
People have probably long since turned the show off. So why don't we wrap it up for the year, folks? Thank you so much for listening. To everybody who listens, tells a friend, rates the show. It's been a great year. It's been great to have more people join the show. And I guess a big thank you to everybody for listening, for this whole show and for the whole year. And Aaron, want to wrap it up and take us home?
Yeah, absolutely. So just wanted to say, everyone, again, thank you for listening. And we'll be back next week. New year, new guests. And right. Everyone, thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more podcasts, show notes, and everything social media. And visit acloud.guru for all your cloud training needs.